everyone, we're going to get started. My name is Miranda. I use she or they pronouns. Thank you for coming. We're going to watch the documentary about Lorraine Hansberry in a little, about 20-30 minutes. It's called Sighted Eyes, Feeling Hard. I'll say a little bit more about it later. But right now we're going to hear from two student activists, Bentley Addison and Sabrina Epstein, an update on the Students Against Private Police movement at Hopkins right now, and a speech about disabled liberation and its intersections with capitalism. And then we're going to have questions and discussion for about 15 minutes, and then we'll watch the film. So Bentley, take it away.
Cool. I'm not going to stand up. But yes, I just, so earlier this year, Hopkins University President Rod Daniels announced that Hopkins was going to push a bill in the Maryland State Legislature to create its own private university police force. So this force would simply just be another arm of terror on the black and brown students of the university and on the black and brown community members already dealing with Hopkins-sponsored gentrification and encroachment in areas like East Baltimore. So this bill would continue police terror against women in the LGBTQ community who are all too often victims of police sexual violence as well as murder at the hands of corrupt cops. So the BPD has already shown that it's a cesspool of corruption and white supremacy, and Hopkins has shown that it's a gentrifying and displacing force to the poor black and brown citizens of Baltimore. Collaboration, which was inevitable with this bill, would only unite the two most unjust, corrupt institutions in Baltimore against the working class. So the announcement of the bill took not only Hopkins students by surprise, but also many community members who stated that they'd never been contacted individually or through community organizations about this plan to wreak havoc and terror in their communities. So a coalition of various student groups on campus, including Hopkins SEDEC, including environmental groups, including the Black Student Union and other groups, it was a very wide coalition organized against this through meetings with community members, legislators, and community organizations to defeat this bill. So Students Against Private Police, or SAP as it came to be known, held rallies on Hopkins campus and held phone banking events to legislators to try and drum up support to kill the bill. So on March 30th, which was about a week ago, the bill was pulled from the Maryland State Legislature for this session. Yes. So while this is like a really huge victory, that doesn't mean that the university is not going to reintroduce the bill in the next session. It's still the official reason the university gave to the students was that it wanted to do more research over the summer and fall. So that just means that it's going to come back next year as stronger than ever, and that means that we have to, in the meantime, keep up our organizing and keep up our strength and keep up our momentum so we can defeat this bill once and for all. So, yeah.
Thanks so much, Bentley. I forgot to say Bentley is part of Hopkins SEDEC, and that is it. And I'm a member of People's Power Assembly and Workers' World Party. And Sabrina's up next to talk about disabled liberation and capitalism, and Sabrina is a member of Hopkins SEDEC and ADA, which stands for
Advocates for Disability Awareness.
Advocates for Disability Awareness, sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. So hi, I'm Sabrina. I'm a disabled college student, and I'm trying to really work to educate groups about ableism, especially like leftist and anti-capitalist groups, because of the tie between capitalism and ableism that I'm going to talk about. And so first, for context, I wanted to talk a little bit about my experience, because disability is such a wide spectrum and everyone has such different experiences, so I think it's really important to hear my story to contextualize it. So I have actually a background working with children with disabilities through a sleepaway camp and an art program back before I started college, and I felt really deeply connected to this population, but it wasn't a community that I was a member of. But my relationship to that community changed within about the past year and a half, when a series of dance injuries that I had developed into a chronic pain disorder that includes fibromyalgia, and it limits my mobility and ability to function and causes brain fog and chronic fatigue and comes with multiple mental illnesses for me. And navigating the world as a disabled person has drastically changed my outlook on the issues surrounding disability. My disability experience has involved receiving accommodations from the university that are rarely followed, unfortunately, navigating a highly inaccessible world filled with broken elevators and steep steps, being accused of faking my disability by students and medical professionals, and being turned away from mental health services because my illness is too complicated. Ableism intrudes into my daily life through all these small interactions, constantly reminding me that to much of the world, my disability makes me less deserving of dignity. And disability can develop at any point in life, and chronic illness, mental illness, intellectual disabilities, learning disabilities, physical disabilities all can fall into this category. It's a really broad spectrum, and it's important that anyone who identifies as disabled is. No one would make that up. There's not a reason to. Clearly there's so much ableism in the world around us, and also if you feel that this is an identifier, I feel like it's important to say, don't feel like you're not disabled enough to be part of the community. It's a really welcoming community because we fight so much against us. And personally, I have an invisible disability, which means that most days you can't really tell that I'm disabled just by looking at me. And for me, an effect of this invisible nature is that it's really rarely taken seriously by doctors, professors, or employers. But my experience is really unique to my diagnoses and my situation in life, so I want to emphasize that I don't speak on behalf of all disabled people, and just like any group, we're not a monolith. So, like I said before, ableism and capitalism are really closely tied together. Socialization under capitalism teaches us to value productivity above all else, which is a fundamentally ableist mindset. Productivity does not determine a person's worth, especially under such an oppressive system. Companies refuse to hire disabled people because accommodations interfere with their idea of productivity and interfere with their ability to profit, which they care about so much more than human beings. And then when disabled people turn to government assistance, which is incredibly difficult to get and not enough, we are called lazy and further stigmatized. And again, government assistance for disabled people is a form of ableism by the state because many disabled people cannot work and they're labeled as the undeserving poor because the government aid is dependent on whether you work for most people, and it just traps disabled people in poverty. And the state is constantly trying to cut back Medicaid and Medicare, which just deeply affects disabled people, further disregarding disabled lives. And whether we work or not, regardless of whether we work, and whether our work fits into the system that capitalism values, we are not tools to be used. We are individuals who deserve respect. And again, capitalism only uses disabled people when our exploitation is convenient. Disabled people are featured in commercials to sell products that don't accommodate to us, and in movies created with no input from the disability community or disabled actors, let alone accommodations like captioning to permit disabled people to see these movies or TV shows. When our existence doesn't fit into these oppressive narratives, we're ignored, too often left without a voice. We are tired of being used as pawns by the capitalist media to invoke pity. We do not want your pity. So often, disability portrayal is as something to be pitied, and something like, oh wow, it's so amazing that this disabled person did this one very normal thing. But the reality is that the reason that you think that is amazing is because there's so much ableism in the world around us preventing us from getting things done, or that we get things done outside the systems that capitalism values. And other forms of oppression directly affect our community. For example, individuals with intellectual disabilities are more than 7 times more likely to be survivors of sexual assault, which is just a really scary, horrible statistic that needs to be taken into account as we work to combat rape culture. And additionally, approximately half of all people murdered by police have a disability, and people with mental illness are 16 times more likely to be killed by the cops than those without, such as we know, Sahid Vassell this week in Brooklyn. And being, disability has every intersection within it, and the issue of police violence, of course, disproportionately affects people who are Black and disabled. And being Black and disabled is not a crime, yet so many people who live at this intersection are tragically killed by the racist and ableist police. So we really need to keep these facts and these voices in mind as we continue to work to oppose and disband police departments. Then the disability community is really diverse. Like I said, it's really home to every intersection, and our community also has its own internal debates, just like every other community really has. So I think it's important to kind of elevate those and show differing opinions within it. So one that I personally think is really interesting is person first versus identity first language. So person first language would be labeling someone as a person with a disability. And it's a movement that's created predominantly by parents of children with disability and by special ed teachers. And again, special education is another, and special needs is another term that a lot of people in the disability community want to move away from. And so their idea is that they want to put the person before the disability and use this phrase people with disabilities rather than disabled people. And like, although this concept is well-intentioned, it's fundamentally rooted in ableism because we don't refer to any other identities in this manner. It would seem really strange to say something like a person who is black or a person who is Jewish instead of just using their identity first. And putting the identity second is saying that like disability makes a person lesser and must be attached after the subject, and that's a small but really meaningful form of ableism. So reclaiming identity first language has been really powerful for me and other disabled people. But one thing to point out with this particular issue is that since it's really an internal debate within the community, it's important to never correct a person on the language they use to identify with, and also be aware that people may use different language in different situations. Like, for example, I might say that I'm chronically ill in situations where I feel that I might be further discriminated against for identifying as disabled, or I might just say that I have an injury if I don't want to have to explain myself. Although, like, I do like to educate people, so usually if someone asks me, I'll try to explain myself more when I'm not at fear of being further discriminated against. And so, although it is really difficult to become overwhelmed by the many ways that ableism affects us, there are really concrete things we can do to fight for disabled liberation. So, first, concerning policy, we must oppose H.R. 620, which is a bill currently awaiting a vote in the Senate that would decrease the power of the Americans with Disabilities Act and like make it so a lot of businesses don't actually have to be as accessible as they are now, which they're already so inaccessible, it would just be horrible. And again, that's capitalism saying that businesses shouldn't have to spend money on making them accessible, which is just such an ableist concept. And we have to work to outlaw paying disabled workers less than the minimum wage, which is still legal in many states. And as we continue to work to raise the minimum wage, we need to make sure to include disability voices in that and make sure that that law applies also to disabled workers. And also we must continue to fight for universal socialized health care because healthcare costs are such a disproportionate burden for people with disabilities. But in addition to policy changes, fighting for disabled liberation can take place in a lot of daily interactions. So like that can be just respecting and going beyond accommodations and making workplaces and events as accessible as possible by including information about accessibility in event descriptions or putting a point of contact for accessibility concerns. Like one thing that I was talking about with some other students in planning events was just putting on a flyer like, for accommodations or for accessibility concerns, please contact this person, which is such an easy thing to add, and like I know personally makes such a difference because it's really hard to get over that internalized ableism to ask for accommodations. And just like above all, we can and must treat people with chronic illnesses, physical disabilities, intellectual disabilities, mental illness, and anyone else who identifies as disabled as human beings. And then one thing that I didn't write down but I was going to add is that since we're at the Harriet Tubman Solidarity Center, a lot of people don't know that Harriet Tubman was disabled. Mm-hmm. And there's a really neat group called the Harriet Tubman Collective that is like a group of black disabled people who work to, like it originally started to make Black Lives Matter a more accessible movement and more inclusive of disability. So if you're interested in that intersection, it's really great to check out.
Thank you so much, Sabrina and Bentley. One more time for both of them. Awesome. So now we're going to have 15 minutes for questions. If you could keep, or discussions, comments, if you could keep your comment or question to 2 minutes, that would be great, just because we have limited time. So I'll do stacks, so just if you have, just make eye contact with me, put your finger up or something like that. Sharon.
Going to time people. That's it.
Okay, yeah, Sharon's going to time people. Trevor, yeah.
Oh, yeah, this is for you. And I'm not being funny. I'm not insulting you. And if you don't want to answer it, then don't. You said that you're a student at Johns Hopkins, correct?
Me? Yes.
Okay, what about you? You're a student also?
Yeah.
Okay. My mother went there, too. And congratulations. You're going to do well in life. Trust me. But if you don't have to answer this part if you don't want to. But if you have a disability, how are you able to survive the rigors of Johns Hopkins University?
Mm-hmm.
What I mean, I'm not being funny. I'm not saying.
No, that's a really
you
valid
can't.
question.
That's because
Yeah.
see, if you hadn't said anything, I would never have known.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to answer it,
Yeah.
fine. If not,
So that's actually really relevant because recently at Hopkins, our director of student disability services was unjustly fired, and currently there's a movement to reinstate him, and also around that to just really improve disability rights at Hopkins. So like I have accommodations in my classes that are like mine are more about like flexible deadlines and more absences just because of the nature of having a chronic pain condition, but there's a lot of different accommodations available, like for students with learning disabilities, there's extended testing times, and there's just the Student Disability Services Office does a lot, but unfortunately they're very understaffed and have very few resources at Hopkins, and like as Bentley said, Hopkins is very problematic, and disability is really not one of their priorities. So we're really working to make that a priority and get more space for the Student Disability Services and more people hired at the counseling center who can accommodate more complex issues, which is also an ableist thing to think that just the counseling center at Hopkins is very ableist. But so it's difficult is the answer, and we actually have a petition. I'm going to plug this. It's that Advocates for Disability Awareness, which Miranda has helped with the petition and this movement also, and I'm very grateful for that. And so we're trying to work on all those demands. So if y'all want to sign that would be amazing.
Okay. I'm just curious. Okay.
Wait.
Okay, I'm going to try to make this with under 2 minutes. Everyone here, be proud of yourself for being at this movement and this assembly at this time, because we are witnessing the growth of the movement. We're seeing students from Hopkins who have vowed and pledged themselves to a growing movement where each and every one of us is oppressed by the same oppressor. The same oppressor that oppresses disabled people, the same oppressor that oppresses women, LGBTQ people, black people, brown people, is the same oppressor who is on a war against all of us. Our unity is what the people need to see. The most oppressed of the community needs to be able to plug themselves into a group like us and fight for revolution. Nothing less, fight for revolution. Not the Democrats or Republicans, but to stand up and fight for revolution against the system. Thank you very much.
Anybody else? Anybody else on staff also? I'll let it get weird. Yeah. Also, sorry, could people just introduce your name, yourselves, and if you're comfortable, your pronouns?
Hi, Sarah, she, her, come from DC. How do you connect with other disabled students on campus?
So on campus, we have a student group that's really largely as a result of this director who was unfortunately fired, who really wanted to work on building disabled community on campus. So we have a club called Advocates for Disability Awareness that the board is all made up of students who receive accommodations or have a disability, whichever they identify as. And we run a lot of events on campus, and we also have an advisory board that's kind of a subgroup of their club that's only for students with disabilities to discuss these issues, and that's really how this petition came about. And we report back to Student Disability Services, but it is difficult because not everyone's comfortable with it because it's really stigmatized. And also in general beyond campus, Twitter is a really amazing way to connect with disabled activists. There are so many wonderful disabled activists on Twitter who have similar politics to us for sure, and it's a really great tool for people who other forms of activism aren't as accessible to.
Thank you.
Just a short and simple question. Are you with or do you know of any disability advocate organizations in the Baltimore area that are not specifically affiliated with Johns Hopkins. Not because I have anything against Johns Hopkins, period. It's just, you know, it's like I'm not a student there. It's not.
Yeah. So I don't know too much about it, but I know ADAPT has a chapter in Maryland, and ADAPT is a really good disability rights organization, and they've been historically responsible for the passage of the ADA and for like all these like super badass protests. And they've been in DC, like last week they were there protesting a lot. So that's a group to look into. And then there's like also just a lot just supporting like smaller local organizations. Like I'm an intern at Make Studio, which is an art studio for adults with disabilities that like provides a professional art studio space, and they make an income off of the art that they sell. So like there's just like a lot of really small like groups like that make a difference in in people's lives. So those would be my 2 recommendations, but I'm sure there's a lot more, and I'm trying to work to learn more about these things too. So if other people have input, that'd be great.
Thank you, and I'd also say it's like very valid to have problems with Hopkins, so you're allowed to say that. We won't get upset. Thanks so much, Sabrina. Does anyone else?
So my name's Andrew. I am a member of Workers' World Party. Most people, a lot of people here are, and something that we've been trying to address for a long time is like, you know, we use this venue a lot, and it's like there's stairs out front, and we just like, you know, if we could get any better deal, we'd get out of this place and have the ground floor thing. But it's like, so it's like my question is, what are some resolutions that like revolutionary organizations can take to make sure that, you know, disabled people have access to stuff that we do? Yeah,
that's such a good point, because it's not that the organization is trying to, you know, in like ways like corporations don't want to accommodate people. You are. It's just whatever resources are available.
Yeah.
I think one thing that like can be done like pretty easily is just say like our event venue has like 6 stairs in the front. Like let us know if that's an issue, and kind of going from there, because different people are comfortable with different things. But one issue is like for people who that's an issue for, like not being aware of it is a problem. So putting that like in a Facebook event description and saying like accessibility, we have this set of stairs. If that's a problem, here's who to contact, and like just working with people, because like unfortunately the reality is like a lot of spaces are like that, and like I think people are probably used to it who it's a big issue for. So asking them, but like first making them aware.
Anyone else? Questions for Bentley about the police? Or
Just a quick question to both Bentley and to yourself and to Sabrina too, whoever knows it. On the question of the police, I know you all have done some research into the connections between Israel. That's one question. And the other question is there any upcoming anti-imperialist actions on Johns Hopkins or in the community coming up?
Okay, yeah, so one thing that like we have done a lot of research in is to the connection between the Israeli military and to the Baltimore Police Department. Like, you know, it's like termed like the deadly exchange. Military technologies like weapons, technologies for handling Palestinian freedom fighters in Gaza are then taken to Baltimore and used to oppress black people and the working class. So it's like, that's a link that we absolutely need to break, and it's just another way that the BPD is a corrupt system. On the topic of anti-war, anti-imperialism actions, on Tuesday, the CIA is having a information session and workshop, like a career center thing at Hopkins campus, and we are going to be leading a protest against that. So yeah, so it's going to be Tuesday at Hopkins. So we're really, you know, excited to say that the CIA has no right to be there and to sort of call attention to all the awful things the CIA has done to dismantle democratically elected left-wing governments all around the world and to, serve as an arm of U.S. imperialism. And then, if you want to talk about C9.
I can talk about C9 if you want to.
Okay, yeah. I was just gonna say something also.
What time Tuesday and our non-students welcome?
It's Tuesday at...
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. So it'll be either at 4 or 5 p.m. It's not the best time. There's an info session at 4, and then at 5 there's a workshop. They're actually doing skills trainings. So 5 p.m. is a better time for pretty much everybody, especially people who are working at that time. But I sent an email. It's going to be somewhat interactive, so we're still figuring out exactly what time. But if you want to be there or help in any way, you can let any 3 of us know, and we can share our contact info. So that'll be exciting. And that's also this CIA recruitment. I mean, this is it's the CIA, it's the FBI, it's the military coming, border control came to our club fair with guns.
Oh my God.
And this is just kind of part of this school to war pipeline going on with you have the military recruiting in high schools, you have the Applied Physics Laboratory, which is a Hopkins-owned place that makes nuclear weapons. It just got $1 billion grant to do that. So this is, it's a whole situation, it's really awful. And this money is just going straight into the war apparatus that is occupying other countries, murdering civilians, and just kind of fueling that imperialist machine of the U.S.
And a lot of the technologies from the Applied Physics Lab go to the military first and come back to the BPD.
Exactly.
So it's further, it's further allowing the police to be so terrible to the community.
And I can talk about another event that's coming up. People in this room should mark the calendars, clear the day, not the whole day. 2 p.m. May 5th. It's going to be the same week as a May Day action that was on the previous Tuesday, but Saturday, 2 p.m., we're having a big march. I mean, considering all these connections to the military that not only Johns Hopkins, but a whole bunch of Maryland schools and universities have to the military. I mean, just as an example, the University of Maryland, one of their flagship programs is their Arabic program. And if you go through that Arabic program, you're guaranteed a spot with the NSA. So then you use your Arabic skills to spy on Arabic-speaking people, and you can imagine the rest. A lot of this is being done under the banner, including the action against the CIA on Tuesday, under the banner of Youth Against War and Racism. We actively invite people to get involved in this sort of anti-war, anti-imperialist struggle. On May 5th, we are doing a march, and until then, we're sort of collecting recruitment posters and recruitment material. So if you're walking around in your daily day-to-day, and you see sort of recruitment posters, recruitment materials, tear that shit down. For military, NSA, CIA, Army, Air Force, etc. Thank you. Tear that shit down, start collecting it, and on the day of May 5th, we're going to do a march and we're going to burn that. Burn it all.
Yeah. So.